Hello mates, Insane Bastard with you once again. So, in my last video, I said why I'm no longer an atheist, even though I still have the same beliefs as when I used to call myself that. And I thought, a lot of people disagreed with my reasoning there in my last video in the comments section, so I decided that I'd make this video to clarify that. This is going to be a response to that video. If you watch this video, watch this one please as well, but of course you're already watching it. And yeah, so I told you how my English teacher, about the conversation I had with him a few days ago on the nature of atheism versus agnosticism, and it's like this. The common view here on YouTube seems to be, well, is that Gnosticism and agnosticism are two positions on whether or not you can know God exists, and atheism and theism are two different positions on whether or not he actually does exist, and those two overlap. And what my English teacher was saying is, no, it goes theism in a straight line to agnosticism, and then atheism, where theism is you believe that you can know whether that God exists or not, and you do believe he exists. And then it goes to agnosticism, where you don't believe that whether or not God can exist, and hence you can make no definite statements about that, but you can still, believe that you're either warranted in believing in him or not warranted, based on whatever, evidence or philosophy that you could subscribe to. And then there's atheism, which is again where you think that it's possible to know whether God exists, and you know that he doesn't. So those are the three schools of thought according to him. Now I'll say why I think his opinion makes more sense, because I did not agree with it when I was having a conversation. I mean, when you're having a debate with somebody, you don't normally give into their point of view, and I didn't. But on the ride home from school, I thought about it, and I thought, well, what's my position really? I do not believe that God exists, but also I do not believe that it's possible to know whether he exists or not. Now, that would make me an agnostic atheist, yeah? Well, another way to rephrase that question is God might exist, but I don't know whether he does. Okay, so what's my degree of certainty? My personal degree of certainty that God does not exist is 99.9999999999999 up to just short of 100, because there's always that one little mote of uncertainty. But how certain or uncertain can you be in one direction versus the other? I mean, you're an agnostic, yeah, let's say, and you have either a preference towards believing in God or a preference towards not believing in God. Or let's phrase it like this: a preference towards believing that there's more evidence that God exists, or a preference towards believing that there's not. There's insufficient evidence to believe that God exists. But at the end of the day, what is your degree of certainty? And at what degree of certainty can you call yourself an atheist or a theist versus simply an agnostic who has absolutely no position? I mean, if you're let's say 50-50, in the middle exactly, 50% God does exist and 50% that he doesn't, what are you? I mean, a lot of atheists here on YouTube would argue that, well, that's atheism because ultimately you don't believe in God, but, I mean, you're having, your doubts, I guess, and, let's say it was 60% God doesn't exist and 40% he does. I mean, you're still, you don't believe that. What I'm trying to say is this: even an agnostic, who doesn't believe in God like myself, I don't believe that God exists, but at the same time, it's extremely foolish to believe that he does not exist. Now, as far as that decision, as far as that belief rather applies to my life, I always work under the assumption that he doesn't exist because there's insufficient evidence to believe it. That doesn't mean that I lost my train of thought. There's not sufficient evidence to believe that God exists. That doesn't mean that he ultimately doesn't exist, and I am not in a position to even say that. I'm just saying that from the evidence available to us, we are not warranted in believing in God. Now, that's not saying anything at all about whether or not I believe that God exists or not, and that about whether I believe that the state of things is that God exists or the state of things is that God doesn't exist. That is a position for theism or atheism, or as it's called here on YouTube, Gnostic theism or Gnostic atheism. So I hope that elucidated my point a bit more. If not, I'm going to have to go more into that later. But I'd like to address some of the things people were saying on my comment section, and I'm not going to bitch about anything because I didn't really find anything insulting. But one guy said, first of all, I'd like to address the issue of the definition of atheism that's accepted here on YouTube commonly is the whole atheism and agnosticism are not mutually exclusive thing. Where does that philosophy come from? Most YouTubers get it from other YouTubers, like big guys like fucking The Amazing Atheist and Tool Time 9901 and guys like that, and they get it from Richard Dawkins. So ultimately, that gets that philosophy originated with Richard Dawkins and his books. And here's the thing. Richard Dawkins, great authoritative figure, but if you're going to rely on him to do all your thinking for you, then you might as well read the Bible and follow that. Richard Dawkins certainly knows what he's fucking talking about, but if you're going to allow him to just draw your viewpoints for you on what this word means, what that word means, etc., then you're basically, if you're going to try to argue that to me, you're appealing to authority, and that's a logical fallacy. And a lot of self-proclaimed atheists here on YouTube also claim to be skeptics. Well, if you're a skeptic, then you should be, willing to have it enter into your mind that it's not only possible, but not entirely unlikely that Dawkins may have used that word incorrectly. Just because something is popular doesn't necessarily make it true. Now, as far as I know, the official definition of what an atheist and a theist is exactly what my teacher told me. And an agnostic as well, which is why I consider myself an agnostic who just happens not to believe in God. Now, one person in my comment section on my last video asked me, official by who? What you have to understand, people, is that there does exist authority that gives words their connotation, whether you like it or not. I mean, words have definitions that are official by certain authorities, like the Merriam-Webster dictionary and all that good stuff. Now, ultimately, I believe that the connotation of words is arbitrary, but that's fine. I'm just trying, whenever I call myself an agnostic, I'm just trying to work within the correct connotation. Have I been using connotation this whole time? No, I meant to say denotation. There exist authorities that determine the denotation of certain words, and I'm trying to work within the correct denotation and all that stuff. And a denotation is the official definition of a word, and whether you like it or not, there do exist authorities that determine that. And ultimately, of course, denotations are completely arbitrary, but, I mean, yeah, there's definition of words for you. Now, I realize that the connotation of atheist is a lot more of what my beliefs entail. When people hear atheist, or when people, think of whatever my beliefs are, they're more likely to think atheist than agnostic who doesn't believe in God. But I just want to make a point in that video that officially, in the high schools of thought, the intellectuals, not like the pseudo-intellectuals and few intellectuals here on YouTube, but in the high schools of thought of philosophers and such who actually have been debating this issue or this question for a long time, long before any of us were here, and they were outside of YouTube. That has been the official definition that they've been using of atheism, theism, and agnosticism. Now, I mean, if you guys still want me to call myself an agnostic atheist, I've got no problem with that. It's, it's, like I said, connotation. I mean, if it makes it easier to communicate, then fine. I mean, here's the other thing, too. Like, when I was talking to him about atheism and agnosticism and theism, when he first said what he finds funny about atheism is that it requires just as much of a leap of faith as theism, I was, first of all, sort of slightly appalled, and even then when he explained why he said that, where what he was referring to as atheism, I would have referred to back then as simply Gnostic atheism, I still felt kind of uneasy, and I think that's just because of my personal attachment to the word. I've been calling myself an atheist for a long time, and I think that a lot of people feel that same way. It all goes back to connotation. Once you've got a connotation of a word firmly set in your mind, you don't want to part with that connotation because it just seems wrong. But yeah, that's been my 2 cents on the matter today. So yeah, I've not told you guys to rate, comment, and subscribe for a long time, or not for a long time, but for a few videos. But yeah.